In neighboring Burkina Faso, the first coronavirus death has been confirmed. We have that and how other countries are handling the situation around the world. Let's take you to South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has been giving updates on the situation there. They have recorded 116 cases so far. That's President Ramaphosa there saying what the South African government intends to do to reduce the impact. Well, the impact is all over the place. The impact is multifaceted everywhere. We're looking today at the economic impact of the crisis, and we're focusing on Ghana. I mean, in the United States, we know what the governments are doing. I have here in the studio my colleague Winston Amoah, who's been doing some work, taking a look at the impact, the economic impact of coronavirus, and he joins me in the studio. Winston, we've seen what's happening in the United States. Just yesterday, we heard the Britain Parliament announced over 300 billion pounds. The United States announced over 800 billion dollars. In Germany, they have their own arrangement. Let's look at the general overview of the impact we're looking at here, in terms of the economy. Okay, well, that's globally, if you're looking at the impact now, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development projects that the impact could be about $2 trillion on the global economy. So that's the cost to the global GDP. That's the total output of the world. Okay, let's try and break it down so people understand. When they put this figure and they say it is the global loss, what exactly does it mean? So globally, you're expecting global economy to grow by a certain percentage. Okay. When global economy grows, it would grow by a certain value. You would calculate that in dollars, or in whichever currency you want to calculate. But for global trade, it's in dollars. Okay. Now, if you look at it, the UN Conference on Trade and Development is projecting that as a result of this, now it's affected trade. And once it affects trade, what it means is that there's going to be possible losses. Yeah. And they're projecting, also because it's affected petroleum, for instance. You know that fuel prices have gone down drastically by over 50%. I mean, if you look at Ghana, for instance, our benchmark revenue of crude price per barrel of about $58. That's how we budgeted. We said it was going to be about $58. But globally now, it is around $28. Just before I got into the studio, when I checked, it was around $28. So that in itself affects the total global output. And so by GDP, we're looking at the total global output. Okay. And so that in itself could be affected by as much as $2 trillion. $2 trillion worldwide? Worldwide, yes. $2 trillion. I'm not quite sure whether that's a reasonable amount of loss, considering the unprecedented nature of what the world is dealing with at the moment. And I'm not sure what you think. I mean, will the world, this is a big blow, of course, but $2 trillion, is it fairly okay in your estimation based on the problems that we've seen this virus cause? Well, you'd have to break it down to various countries able to determine. Globally, countries will deal with it differently. And so the United States can afford to deal with that. The United Kingdom could also afford to deal with it. But you ask yourself that simple question: can Ghana afford to deal with it? Can Africa afford to deal with it? Okay. That is where the challenge is, because for countries which have very high GDPs and whose output are very high, you say that these countries should be able to deal with these challenges. Even then, it is expected that some of the measures they put in place would actually lead to a boom in their industry, so that the impact is not very really felt. Which is where I started with that. If you look at the United States, they've committed an amount of, over $800 million. If you look at the UK, they've done the same. But let's bring it back home to Africa. Would you say that Africa perhaps will take the biggest hit, because these are developed countries, they are cushioning their people? But will we be able to say the same about Africa? We'll bring it down to Ghana. Let's start with Africa. Let me just use a bit of a Ghanaian example. Let me do a bit of inductive analysis here, and say that if I look at the Ghanaian example and then I transfer that, to form a general opinion about Africa. In many African countries, we rely, of course, our budgets are donor funded. We rely on key commodities. So, for instance, in Ghana, we're relying on oil. If oil prices goes down, you can understand how we're going to feel it. We're also
relying on import duties. And so if, the import duties are not forthcoming, then you can understand how we're going to feel. And that's how come the UN Conference for Trade and Development, because we're looking at international trade, for instance, that is going to be hugely affected as a result. You've seen all the bans here and there. And just look at the fact that in 2018, the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, they were able to bring in some foreign direct investment of over 3 billion. And that was a reduction of the 2017 figure. Okay, so how about 2020, when we have coronavirus and we have a ban on travels by government officials. We've also banned flights from countries that are affected with over 200 persons or more. So are we going to be expecting people from these areas to come into the country? We can't put figures to it currently, but I mean, if you look at the Ghana Tourism Authority, when their CEO joined us this morning on the Super Morning Show, he's talked about how it is likely to impact them. Their revenue projections will be lost by some 25%. He's beginning to put figures to it. And so you could understand the impact that would feel.
Again, let's try and bring it back to Ghana. Again, other countries are putting in some sort of support. You've indicated all the parts where we're making losses. These are major losses that we're making as a country whose budget is donor funded largely. How is this going to affect Ghana, given that we are not sure of any sort of support coming from Ghana? Perhaps tax incentives at the moment, but we've not seen that yet.
Yes, we've not seen that yet, Gifty. And if you look at the Ghanaian situation, it's very important to look at a few things, because our total expenditure for 2020 is about 85 billion, out of which we intend to raise 67 billion of it through domestic revenue and grants. Domestic revenue about 65 billion. So that tells you that we're doing well when it comes to funding of our own budget. But the finance minister was in Parliament yesterday and he made a few comments. He looked at the fact that he believes that international trade was going to be affected. Let's look at international trade. So we're looking at import duties. If you look at the 2020 budget, the appendix, particularly page 216, just so we check and verify. Now it talks about how we're projecting to earn some 5.8 billion Ghana cedis from import duties. Speaking to some importers, what they tell you is that, well, they've actually sent monies to China and other parts of the world. They're waiting for their goods, and they do not have their goods as we speak. So their monies are locked in those countries. They still do not have goods or their products. Products they're currently selling are products they ordered prior to Christmas. Okay. What that means is that the projected import duties that you're expecting could be affected. And that's something that the finance minister has confirmed in Parliament.
So that has been affected?
Would be affected.
Because so far, the conversation has not really gone towards incoming goods. I mean, that has not really been our focus area. Our focus area has been incoming human beings. And the fact that they may be carrying this virus.
Exactly, and that's why when the finance minister went to Parliament yesterday, it was important he put that out. He didn't really put figures to it, but if you look at the projections we made, once he talks about the fact that this could be affected, mind you, I mean, a lot of Ghanaians do business in the Far East, and that was one of the first places to have been locked down, particularly in China. Okay, so as we speak, you can't put figures to it and say this is how much we're going to lose. But if you look at the impact that it's had in other countries, now many factories in China are reopening, but even as the factories reopen, they are not manufacturing the things they previously used to manufacture. The demand and supply situation is such that a lot of people in China now want nose mask and facial mask and what have you. Many of the factories have gone into that. Ghanaian businesses, when we spoke to the president of Guta this morning, says they have their cash locked up in China and they are waiting patiently. So it could be fair to project that if nothing changes and the economy is holding all other things constant, the projected 5.8 billion import duty could reduce.
Yes. Well, like you said, he doesn't put any figures to it, so we don't have an idea. But we do know that every aspect of our lives will take a hit based on what is happening. Winston, I'm not sure if you have listened or if experts have said anything about what Ghana can do, what Ghana government can do in terms of cushioning these companies. I was just having a chat with a friend yesterday who works with who works with the Marriott Hotel, and they have laid off people already. They've laid off workers, and this is the United States of America. So the hotel industry or the hospitality industry has taken a hit. Perhaps because we're not so linked to them, we do have some shocks that is absorbing what is coming. But certainly it's going to get to a point where Ghana or Ghanaian entrepreneurs, Ghanaian businessmen and women are going to need some sort of support like the US and the UK are doing. Are the experts saying anything about what kind of support people will need?
Okay, before I even get into the support that Ghanaians would need, it would interest you to note that Nigeria currently is putting in place support for Nigerian businesses. There's been a reduction in interest rate. Of course, the Monetary Policy Committee of the central bank is meeting, and we're hoping that once they're done with their meeting, they'll be able to come out and tell us that, okay, we're reducing interest rates, also because of how businesses or how industry has been hit by the effects of coronavirus. As we speak, and when we had discussions, for instance, with the CEO of the Ghana Tourism Authority, he talks about how they're gathering data, and once they're done gathering the data, then they would be able to make certain appeals to government on what government should be doing for them.
As in the businesses in Ghana want to make an appeal to government?
So, you need to be able to identify, for instance, how this has affected you.
Okay. And what kind of help you
would need.
Right.
But the challenge also that we face as a people, and I started by talking about total expenditure for 2020, for instance. So a bit of a reduction in, our revenue generation could actually hit our budgets.
True.
So that's what we are faced with, because you're looking at a circumstance of wages and salaries. If you look at the projections, we've made 26 billion Ghana cedis. We're looking at interest payments about 21 billion Ghana cedis. And capital expenditure, a lot of the infrastructural projects that we need, is about 9 billion Ghana cedis. So you ask yourself, what are we going to do now? Bearing in mind that we projected a barrel of crude oil at $58, it is now less than $30. It means we're going to be losing half if it continues like this. Of course, there's always the stabilization fund, which we could get into it. But the challenge is that, and as we've seen in previous years in 2015, where we had to look at other forms of taxation in order to cushion the economy by way of generating more revenue. So the Ghanaian situation, the experts will tell you, is a bit dicey.
A bit of time.
It's a bit dicey because once we're hit this way, it would affect our revenue generation. So either we cut, say, our capital expenditure and then use a bit of it to support, the companies, or maybe we could probably reduce our expenditure on goods and services. But once we have all the data on the impact on Ghanaian businesses, real data specifics, we'll be able to deal with it.
Well, certainly this is a developing story, and as we go along, we'll get the specifics that helps us to make up our mind as to what exactly industry players will need and whether or not the government will be able to support them as other economies are doing. Hopefully also with this, the trigger of the emergency legislation in Parliament will give us a clearer idea whether or not government is going to look elsewhere to get more money. We'll get to know all of that with time. I'm sure Winston will be able to come along and give us some more as and when we have it. Winston, thank you very much for coming through. Winston Amoah is my colleague here, helping us to understand the global impact, economic impact of coronavirus. We did focus a bit more on Ghana though, because of course that's the right thing to do. But it is linked, Ghana's economy is linked to other economies which are all taking a hit. We'll bring you more updates from across the world. We'll be in Germany. We'll talk to you about Italy. We told you how Ghanaians there have been affected. We have an update on the United Kingdom and also the United States of America.